Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
I think this is super fun and interesting. It totally relates to marketing and the whole go-to-market motion and the idea of being creative. So, Dr. Elouise, I know that you had some posters or things that make you remember what we're going to talk about today. So maybe we'll have you describe.
I think the campaign that we're talking about, the Think Different campaign, came out in like 97, 98. And it was at a time when Apple was sort of really struggling and it had lost its way. And Steve Jobs had just come back. And I can't remember the exact timing, but the iMac came out around then, and they sort of just retooled everything over like there was a good 5-6 years where they just they rebuilt the operating system, they rebuilt the hardware, like ground up, just really amazing, just a way of fixing a business that had fallen into a state of disrepair.
And I'll throw in there interesting. So Steve Jobs was ousted from Apple.
Yes.
Let's be very clear. There was a new CEO that was very adamant that he was completely removed from the organization. So he was kicked out. He went to start, which is now named, right? He renamed to Pixar. So he got into the movie and entertainment industry. So he was CEO and running that company, sold it, made several $1 billion in that acquisition. But so eventually Apple tanked and was just losing crazy amounts of money because of competition. Dell and IBM had really come into the market and were kind of taking over and dominating the market share. So they asked him to come back. He was originally the interim CEO. So they're like, we don't trust you enough. We want you to be the interim CEO. And so the marketing team and the agencies that they were working with had pitched him on launching a campaign called We're Back, meaning we're back now because Jobs is here, he's at the helm again. And he completely put a kibosh on that. And he was like, absolutely not. We are not doing that campaign. That is not the direction I want to go. Hence the birth of the Think Different campaign. So I wanted to just throw in a little background but I will say the interesting thing is he stuck with the 2 words.
Yeah.
So he liked the 2-word idea, but wanted something that was much more authentic and representative of the brand and not so product focused.
Yeah. And I mean, this gets to Steve Jobs' genius. And I say the genius in terms of the ability to draw out an emotional reaction, because in 97, I would say I was a Mac fan, but I was ambivalent. I didn't care. And there was tons of computer, as you were talking about Dell and IBM, there was also Compact and Gateway and Acer and all these other sort of like just computer companies that don't exist anymore. And that's also when Linux was making it sort of, the desktop Linux was making ever so slight inroads into the market. It never really materialized in that way. So I can say for me, I was ambivalent about Apple. I liked Apple, but you
weren't obsessed.
Yeah, I would say I'm obsessed today. I've got my iPhone, my iPad, my my MacBook, I've got I got my watch, I've got the credit card. I mean, like, I'm all Apple. So Apple TV, Apple, anyway. But in 97, 98, when this campaign hit, it was so inspirational to me. I just loved it. And there were 4 sets of ads, and we played one of them here. And or no, I guess there was one. I don't know how many sets of ads there were, but there were different people featured in each one. And it was so, like, it was an early version. In today's terms of social media, it would have gone mega viral. And for not having the YouTube, TikTok infrastructure back then, it still just nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, go ahead.
So a couple things that I want to highlight that I thought were really interesting about the strategy here is Jobs handpicked the icons that were featured.
Yeah.
And 3 of the features were Einstein, Gandhi, and Lennon. And the reason behind that, if you dive into it, was that each symbolize transformation. So at the core of the campaign, he was trying to highlight and talk about transformation and how Apple was transforming the way that we interact and use devices and communicate globally. So those were very intentional selections. And then the Here's to the Crazy Ones TV spot, which was narrated by Richard Dreyfuss. In this spot that we played at the beginning, I want to call out a couple things about, at the time, what were so innovative and kind of creative about this is that it was total minimalist strategy. So instead of just throwing anything and everything into the ad, it was black and white portraits, no music until the final notes. And then at the very end, as you saw, the Apple logo fades in. The key is no product was shown. And this kind of birthed what I call the age of the no hard sale.
Mm-hmm.
When we were used to, and it's still something that you see a lot of companies who kind of, if you look at ads online or you get emails and they're obnoxiously promoting and pushing their product instead of trying to sell value and sell a way of life and sell a way of solving problems. And so Apple was one of the very first people to really make the no hard sell kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. So I want to interject here because it was so successful, that minimalist approach, and by focusing on these people, these inspirational people, it got folks like myself to just go, like, become fanatical about at least the campaign. So at the time, Apple sold a limited set of posters of all these people that said "Think Different." And this is what I couldn't find before today's session, but maybe we'll do a little cutaway in a future episode if I can find them. I still have them. I'm convinced of it. But there was 4 sets, and so I remember scouring eBay because they sold out like instantaneously, because there was a limited run. And then and there were 4 sets, and I wanted those sets, a set with Amelia Earhart and the one with Jim Henson. And for many years I had both posters up in my office. And that was the only artwork I had. That's how fanatical I was about these posters, because I just loved them so much. And they're big, they're huge posters. Yeah. And actually, the Amelia Earhart one was really amazing because she's looking at the camera sideways, so her eyes would follow you around the room. It was really cool.
And I think, to speak to, if you were to ask what made this campaign so brilliant, why was there this craze of people wanting the posters like you? Why were people, just rushing out to become obsessed with Apple and buy their products? And I think a couple big shifts. It was brand value messaging over product specification. And this was one of the first times we saw, I think, a large scale company really do this. And for me, at least, I think it really humanized technology. And it made Apple very aspirational, kind of turned devices into a symbol of identity. And it wasn't about Apple selling computers anymore. It was more they were selling this identity and purpose and belief for being part of something greater and bigger.
Yeah, and I think it's no coincidence that couple of years later, I think, well, I can't remember what year Google was founded, but as Google evolved, their corporate ethos it was very sort of anchored in this idea that their moniker early on was "Do No Evil," and I would hypothesize or sort of posit that this idea that what Steve Jobs did with sort of this personal identity associated with a product probably influenced quite a number of tech companies that emerge out of that time frame.
And I saw a quote, and I don't know where who actually this came from, but they said, the kind of, when describing and talking about this campaign, they said, if you buy a Mac, you're joining the ranks of the people who move the world forward. And I think that's a really good kind of just summing up the essence of why this campaign was so interesting and so successful. Another thing I want to note is the timing of this was very interesting. So Apple didn't wait until they had better hardware. They rebranded first. So a lot of companies would have said, well, we can't message and market and promote this. We don't have the actual product to back it up. And Jobs said, we're going to do it very differently. So the campaign created an emotional runway for the products like the iMac and the iPhone and to take off. And I thought that was a really interesting strategy, which could have gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, right? It's true. Could have gone way wrong. And just to build on your point, in retrospect, now that we have history that has evolved, you can draw a very clear line between this campaign all the way through those breakthrough launches of the iPhone, which was like mind altering, the iPad that nobody thought was going to be necessary, et cetera, et cetera. And now it looks like it was cohesive, but as you said, like it could have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, because you're messaging something that you don't actually have yet, right? You're creating as you're doing, is what I like to say. And I think Jobs is one of the most innovative marketers of our time. And I think he really birthed what we call now is value-based storytelling over transactional marketing. And I think anybody who's in marketing, has learned about and tested and understands the importance of that. And Jobs was really the one who kind of spearheaded that and made that a thing. And I think that's a pretty incredible legacy that he left in the marketing world.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said, I think it really influenced a whole generation or two of tech companies.
Yeah. So shout out to Jobs and all.
May his memory be a blessing.
Yeah. And all the folks that were involved in that, because I think it's impacted a lot of us more than we even know.
Yeah. And I mean, no doubt that it's hard to like put into words, but I remember it giving me motivation. And I mean, for years I had those two posters on the wall, and my wife would just like, why do you have those up there? And she was thrilled. I took them down, but for me it was like seeing these two icons. And there was Martin Luther King Jr. and Maria Callas, and I think Isadora Duncan or Martha Graham, and like true just geniuses. And there is something about bringing together in an ideological form or putting them into your imagination. It's like anything, for me, it felt like anything was possible. And yeah, unbelievable. Like and Apple's had some great ads. Many of our listeners may not have been alive when the what was it, the Macintosh commercial that was very, I think it was 84, but I could be wrong about that. But like that was another one, and it premiered at the Super Bowl in whatever year it did, and it was just so like mind altering as well. Probably not as resonant, but I think that ad ranks as one of the top 100 of all time, if not top 50. So I can't remember, but you know which one I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how to describe it, but they throw the hammer and break the thing. And anyway, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but
so I'll close out kind of my final thought on this is, I think this campaign was super rare because it made me feel like I was the product. And I think that was a really empowering piece of it for me.
And the only thing I'd say on the way out here is I can't think of another campaign that has been so impactful. I think we've gotten derivatives where TikTok is very much full of people talking about products, which I think is similar. But I don't, like, as a brand, I cannot think. Maybe the closest one was pets.com. I actually bought the pets.com puppet before they went out of business. So that might be another topic for another day.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of vain contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.